Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the ArcGIS Enterprise Security Model. I'm John, and with me today is Abram. For those of you that haven't attended one of our webinars, we're recording the session and we'll email you the recording along with the slides after the webinar. If you have any follow-up questions about this webinar, feel free to contact Abram or myself. Now, if you do have any questions about the content we're presenting, please use the Q&A panel. Be sure to choose Ask All Panelists, then type your question in the box and click Send. Abram and I will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to type your questions at any time. In today's session, we will focus on several topics related to the security model used within ArcGIS Enterprise. This webinar is designed to help you with understanding the identity-based security model, setting up roles and privileges, managing user access to content through groups, ArcGIS Enterprise Server Federation, and configuring enterprise logins and single sign-on. And before we begin to All right, everyone. Thanks, John. So before we begin to discuss the finer points of any security-related topics, we should quickly revisit the components that make up ArcGIS Enterprise. So ArcGIS Enterprise puts collaboration and flexibility at the center of your organization's GIS. It pairs industry-leading mapping and analytics capabilities with a dedicated web GIS infrastructure to organize and share your work on any device, anywhere, at any time. To make this possible, ArcGIS Enterprise requires 4 different software components which, when combined, form what is known as a base deployment. It's important to note that all these components have been available in releases prior to 10.5, and it's likely that you've seen this slide or a slide like it before, because this pattern is not new. First is the ArcGIS Web Adapter. The Web Adapter acts as a gatekeeper of sorts to your ArcGIS Enterprise. It integrates with your existing web servers where it takes requests and routes them appropriately to the related components of ArcGIS Enterprise. This is also where any web tier security would be implemented for your ArcGIS Enterprise. Next, we have Portal for ArcGIS. Portal provides the web front end for a user's ArcGIS Enterprise experience, which may be familiar to anybody who's worked with ArcGIS Online already. It also provides the infrastructure backend for a user's web GIS, providing a content management system where users can create maps, applications, and web services. Through the Portal's content management system, you have deep control of the security, roles, sharing, and searchable content within your web GIS. Next, we have ArcGIS Server. This software component can be thought of as the engine that powers the web services themselves, which the web GIS pattern and therefore all of ArcGIS Enterprise relies upon. And last but not least, we have the ArcGIS Data Store. This component is an Esri-managed data repository which stores any hosted spatial content that has been shared to the portal. Note that the ArcGIS Data Store is not a replacement for your existing enterprise geodatabases. Now that we've covered the base deployment, we can talk about security within ArcGIS Enterprise, beginning with identity, roles, and groups. Unlike a standalone geodatabase or a standalone GIS server site, ArcGIS Enterprise offers a system of engagement, a system designed from the ground up to allow more people to share and understand complex data and ideas. This is made possible through the ArcGIS Enterprise Portal's identity and sharing-based security model. When starting to build your system of engagement, the first thing to think about is how you will create identities in the system. So, who are your users? How will you manage onboarding new users? ArcGIS Enterprise offers flexible options to help with the creation of identities in the system. Next, for every identity in the system, we must consider and assign the appropriate role that each should play. How do you expect people to use the system? Which privileges and levels of control do you want people to have? Any content such as layers, services, maps, and apps are secured through groups within the ArcGIS Enterprise portal. When creating groups, the question to ask is, how will you organize content for easy sharing? You can add users manually to these groups, or you can link them to enterprise groups from your organization's identity store. But we'll talk more about this later. Once we have established identities, roles, and groups within ArcGIS Enterprise, we're ready to create and share content securely. As of version 10.5, ArcGIS Enterprise offers identities in 2 different user levels. A level 1 user has fewer privileges than a level 2, can be a member of groups, and can view content. However, a level 1 user cannot create, modify, or save content. These are effectively viewer-only users, and as of January 1st of this year, there is no charge for level 1 named users in ArcGIS Enterprise. With a level 2 user, full privileges are possible, and they can create, modify, and save content. Any named user from a deployment prior to 10.5 is automatically considered a level 2. Let's talk about roles. A role defines a specific set of privileges for the user. It controls what he or she can do within ArcGIS Enterprise. Out of the box, there are 4 default roles. We have administrator, publisher, user, and viewer. Note that all level 1 users are limited to viewer. And as the administrator, we can also create custom roles, which we'll have a look at next. So these custom roles allow an administrator to control in a very granular fashion what users can or cannot do, such as the ability to edit features, perform analysis, share content to the public, and much, much more. Sharing is how you allow others in your organization to access and interact with the content that you've published to ArcGIS Enterprise. There are 3 levels of sharing. You can share with a group, you can share with the organization, or you can share with everyone, including people who are beyond the organization. You can change the sharing settings of content you've created at any time. We can leverage groups to organize and secure content in ArcGIS Enterprise. Groups can be set up to organize your users' content according to theme or initiative, by department, based on specific projects, or just on an ad hoc basis. User identities in the portal can belong to groups, and content can be shared to groups. When a group is private, the content shared to that group can only be accessed by members of that group, thereby securing the content to members of the group. Also, enterprise groups are supported in Portal when configured with your organization's enterprise identity store. Now, John will show off how identity groups and roles work in ArcGIS Enterprise.
Thanks, Abram. Hi, everyone. So what I'd like to do here is just show a very quick demo that demonstrates creating users, creating a role so that those users can be managed by, and adding those users to groups and sharing some content for them. So in our scenario here, what I have is some users that are going to actually be using Collector for ArcGIS in the field. So what I want to do is actually set up a role as well as add them to the system so that they can actually do this kind of work. So I want to start first by actually adding these users to the system. So right now I have a brand new ArcGIS Enterprise environment, no other users in it right now other than just the administrative user. And what I'd like to do is actually add 3 different data collectors so that they can actually start doing their work. So to do this, I'm going to start by selecting Add Members. And what I'm going to have here is 3 separate options. Now, depending on the way ArcGIS Enterprise is configured, I might be able to add users from a SAML-based identity store, and I might be able to add users from sort of an existing directory service that I'm connected to, like LDAP or Active Directory. We'll look at those a little bit more later, but for now, what I have is everything configured to support the built-in portal members. So these users are actually going to be managed and maintained within the ArcGIS portal environment. I'm going to click Next. Now, if I want, I can actually add each of these users manually and type them out. But what I'd prefer to do is actually add these particular users all at once by batch. So what I'm going to do is add it from a file. So let's take a quick look at what that file looks like. So this file is basically a comma delimited file that contains some profile information about the user, like their first name, last name, and email, as well as a username for them, passwords, and then the roles and levels I want them to be set at by default. Now we're going to get to actually creating a brand new role in a bit, but for now I'm just going to load them up using the default user role, and then we'll change that after the fact. However, I could have created a role and then added that here in this file when I actually created them for the first time. So we're going to use this file to create these users. I'm going to select my comma delimited file, and I'm going to upload it. So now I get a chance to review the 3 users that I'm trying to create. If I want to change anything at this point, I can click on Edit and change any one of these users. But I'm going to save and review. It's also important to note that if you're using our command line interface to create users, you would be using the same file format for those users. I'm going to select Add Members and return back to my organization. Now, these users have been created and added. They have profiles. They haven't logged in yet. But for now, they're using the user role. Now I want to change that because I don't really want to give them as much permission as a user has. What I would like to do is just give them the permissions they need to use Collector for ArcGIS. So in that case, really, I want to be able to share stuff with them, add them to groups, and basically let them edit the features within those shared items. So to do that, I'm going to create a brand new role. So I'm going to click on Edit Settings, and I'm going to select the Roles option. Here's where I would actually create any brand new roles, but I can also actually assign roles to users by batch, as well as set up some default properties for brand new users that might be added to the system. So I can actually change the level the users might have when they are first created in the system. I can actually change the default role they might have when they're first created in the system. But for now, I'm going to leave those and just create a brand new role for our data collectors. So I'm going to give it a name. And some description. And now what I'm going to do is choose a template that already has some pre-configured privileges that I want to override and change for this brand new role. So I'm going to use the user template because it kind of gives me the starting point of what I'd like. Now, I don't want these users to actually see any other members within the system because they don't really need that. All they need to see is the data that they're going to edit. As far as groups go, I don't want them to create groups, but I need them to join groups so that I can share content with them. So I'm not going to let them create groups. As well, I actually don't want them to create content either because they're purely going to be editing the content that I share with them either as an administrator or as a group manager. I'm going to actually also turn off sharing because again, I don't really want them to share anything. They're going to be maybe doing some analysis and definitely adding features within the collector environment. So I'm going to click Save Role. My role is now created. And now I need to actually assign these demo users that I created to this role. So the Assign Roles tool allows me to sort of select a group of users and assign them all to one role in sort of one shot by batch. It makes it easier than me doing it one at a time. Now, I could go back to my organization panel and in the drop-down manually change the role for each one of these users, but this allows me to do it a lot quicker. So I'm going to add all my demo users, click Next, and now I'm going to specify the role that I want them to now be a part of. I'm going to click Assign, and we're good. I'm going to click Save here, and if we go back now, and you can see that they've actually been changed to use that data collector role for me. So the last thing I want to do in this demo is I actually want to just create a group and share some content with these users so they can get out there and start collecting in the field. So I'm going to go up and select Groups, and I'm going to create a brand new group for the data collectors. I'm going to give it a name. Some tags and some metadata information. Now what I need to do is set some properties for that group. How are people going to access this group? How are people going to be, what people can do with the content within this group? So for now, I only want people in the organization to see this group because this isn't something I want to share with everyone. It's for my data collectors. I only want people to join this group who are invited. So I don't want to give them the option to opt in or to ask for membership to the group. I really want to manage this purely from an administrative level to ensure I know who is in the group. I can manage who's in the group. And finally, I'm going to select Create Group. So now the group's created, I need to invite my users. So I can just very quickly click Invite Users. Add each of my users to the group. Now, in this case, I don't really want them to have to worry about responding to my invitation. I want them in the group right away so that they can go out and start collecting data. So I'm going to select Add Members automatically or immediately to the group, click Add to Group, and now they're actually a part of this group. So the last thing I really need to do is just share some stuff with them so that they can actually do their work. Now, I've already created some objects that I can share with them. I've created a hosted feature layer that contains some field node information that they can edit, and a map that they can use in Collector for ArcGIS to start working and start collecting the data on their devices. I'm going to select those options, click Share, and then specify that I only want to share this with the data collector group. Click OK, and now I'm actually sharing data with them. They're ready to go and they can start doing their work. Now, back to you, Abram.
Great. Thanks a lot, John. All right. So we can now move into a security topic that many of you have probably heard about, but some of you may not yet fully understand. And this is the concept of federating an ArcGIS server site within ArcGIS Enterprise. So let's talk about federation. Federating an ArcGIS server site with your portal integrates the security and sharing models of your portal with one or more ArcGIS server sites. In order to understand federation, we need to know a bit more about the underlying mechanics of how security works on the web, namely what tokens are and how they work. When accessing secure information in ArcGIS Enterprise, every HTTP request to a secure resource must be accompanied by a valid ArcGIS token. You can think of a token like a little key that uniquely identifies a user to the system. So how does this work? Let's take a closer look at this process, but sort of in a more general sense at first. So the process begins by the user requesting access to the service. If the service is a secure resource, the service sends the user to a token service in order to authenticate. The user then authenticates to the token service, typically by providing their credentials. The token service issues a token back to the user, and the user passes their token to the secure service. And if the user is authorized to access the resource, then access is granted and the service delivers its content to the user. Now, let's take a closer look at how this process actually works in the federated model of ArcGIS Enterprise. From our example before, what was the user is you. The service is ArcGIS Server, and in ArcGIS Enterprise, the token service is actually portal for ArcGIS. And combined, we have the federated architecture of ArcGIS Enterprise. With this federated model in mind, let's go back and look now more closely at how acquiring a token actually works. So first, the user, you, requests access to a secure ArcGIS server service. Next, the service sends the user over to Portal to acquire a token. The user authenticates with Portal. Portal returns a token to the user, and the user passes that token over to the ArcGIS server service. And if authorized, the service grants the user access and delivers the content to the user. Now, I will show you how to actually go ahead and federate an ArcGIS server site with your ArcGIS Enterprise portal. All right, so let's begin by going to ArcGIS Server Manager for our unfederated GIS server site and log in with the primary site administrator credentials. Here we've got the familiar sample world cities, but let's go up to security settings and have a look at what we have. Under the configuration settings, we've got our ArcGIS server built-in user store and role store. Our authentication tier is the GIS server, and our authentication mode is ArcGIS tokens. These are the default settings for ArcGIS server. Let's sign out of Server Manager, and let's log into our ArcGIS Enterprise portal to begin the federation process. To do this, we'll log in with our administrative identity, and we can go up to organization, but before we do, we're going to have a look at the content owned by this administrative user, and we can see they have no items yet. Now, to federate, let's click on Organization and go to Edit Settings, go down to Servers, and we're going to click on Add Server. And here we have to enter two different URLs. The first URL that we're going to enter is our services URL, and this URL is our web adapter URL, and importantly, it's the URL that all of our end users are going to leverage when they're interacting with our services. Next, we have our administrative URL, and for us today, it's going to be the same URL that we used for our services URL because we have administrative access enabled on our web adapter. So we'll enter our site administrator credentials here next. And once we've entered these, we will go ahead and click the Add button. And at this time, a few things are happening. So Portal is validating the URLs that we've entered. The ArcGIS server security settings are being updated. And all of the services are having linked items created in the portal. This typically takes a couple minutes, but we're done here. And we can click the Save button. Now, if we go back up to Content, we will see that all of our services have come over as linked items. And through this interface, we can actually control the security and secure access to these items by changing their sharing settings. Now, if we go back to ArcGIS Server Manager, you'll notice that we get signed in automatically. We didn't have to log in a second time. So clicking on Security to have a look at our security settings, we see that under our configuration settings here, our user store, our role store, our authentication tier, and our authentication mode are all Portal for ArcGIS, and our portal URL is listed here as well. So we've shown that federating an ArcGIS server site with your ArcGIS Enterprise portal is just that simple and provides really practical benefits. users can now log in once with their identity to gain access to all the different services, content, and functionality that ArcGIS Enterprise has to offer. Now, we're going to switch gears and move on to our next topic, so let's pass it back over to John.
Thanks, Abram. All right, we're going to talk a little bit here about identity stores. So what we've seen already is a federated security model is key to supporting single sign-on between Portal and your ArcGIS server deployment. As we'll see shortly, it's also important when supporting SSO between ArcGIS Enterprise and other web apps and services. Along with federating Portal and server, you need to decide where your identities and privileges will be managed and how those users will be authenticated. Now, Portal for ArcGIS can be configured to directly use two types of identity stores, the ArcGIS built-in identity store and an enterprise identity store. The ArcGIS built-in identity store is enabled by default when you install the software. It manages all accounts, passwords, roles, and group membership. It's typically used in standalone environments, environments with basic security requirements, or for development and testing. When using the built-in store, all group management is done in Portal or through scripts. Each standalone site you deploy will be responsible for managing its own set of users. This means your users will have a different login for each site and any external services, like ArcGIS Online, you may use. If you're looking for more advanced security options like primary key interface or stronger password policies, use an enterprise identity store. With an enterprise identity store, Portal for ArcGIS is configured to use your existing Active Directory or LDAP environment. The advantage to this approach is that account management is centralized and a user can securely access multiple services in your environment using one account. It's also possible to link Portal group membership to groups in your LDAP or Active Directory environment. Now, authentication occurs at one of the following tiers, the Portal tier, the web tier, or using an identity provider that supports the security assertion markup language. Portal tier authentication, also referred to as ArcGIS token-based authentication, uses the built-in ArcGIS token service to authenticate users and generate a token. It can be used with either the built-in identity store or an enterprise identity store. This means all authentication requests are either processed by Portal or Portal delegates that request to the configured enterprise identity store. In fact, with Portal tier authentication, Portal can be configured to support both identity stores at the same time. In this scenario, both types of users will use the same sign-in page. Token-based authentication is typically used in these environments or in environments that want to support more than one identity store without configuring SAML. They have minimal security requirements or are internal only. Configure anonymous access to resources. One downside, though, is that this configuration does not support single sign-on. Now, when using web tier authentication, your web server is responsible for authenticating users. This allows you to leverage your web server's built-in security options. For example, with IIS, you can use integrated Windows authentication to sign into Portal. This will create a single sign-on experience for your Active Directory users. Group membership can be managed by Portal groups, enterprise groups, or both. Other configuration options include primary key infrastructure and HTTP digest authentication. Because it's closely integrated with your directory server, web tier authentication is primarily used with internal-only deployments of ArcGIS Enterprise. Now, SAML authentication allows you to support single sign-on between cloud-based services and services within your organization. The security access markup language is an open standard that defines a way to pass credentials between services that are configured to trust each other. With SAML authentication, a trust relationship is configured between an identity provider and a service provider. The identity provider is responsible for requesting a user's credentials. It works directly with an identity store to authenticate the user and create a SAML response. The service provider is the web app or service that the user is trying to access. In our case, Portal for ArcGIS. Now, service providers configured to use the same identity provider can participate in the single sign-on experience. And we'll see that in our demo with ArcGIS Online and with our Portal for ArcGIS instance. Now, depending on the features of your SAML IDP, you can configure Portal to use multiple identity stores or multi-factor authentication. So after what we've seen previously, how does authentication and authorization look with SAML authentication? Well, first, the user attempts to log into ArcGIS, Portal for ArcGIS. Now, in previous workflows, Portal for ArcGIS managed the authentication step, but this time Portal is redirecting you to the configured identity provider. Now, the identity provider is responsible for prompting you with a login page. Credentials are then passed to the identity provider, not the Portal for ArcGIS environment. If the user provides the correct credentials, a SAML response is returned to the browser. The browser now sends the SAML response to Portal for ArcGIS, and Portal for ArcGIS verifies the SAML response and the user is logged in. So actually, let's take a look at a demo of how all this works, and we'll take a look at enterprise groups as well at the same time. So I'm just going to share my screen, and let's go back to our ArcGIS enterprise environment. So I'm actually just going to log out from what I was doing previously. And what I actually want to do is I want to start by showing you what the user experience is going to be like in an environment that has been configured using a SAML-based identity provider. So I'm actually going to connect to my own ArcGIS Online organization. And at the end of this demo, if I do all this correctly, at the end of this demo, if it all works, ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise will actually work together in a single sign-on experience. So here, this is the configured ArcGIS Online environment. As you can see here, I actually have the ability to log in using a traditional ArcGIS account, or I can actually log in with my enterprise login. In this case, I'm configured to an Active Directory Federation server. My environment's called TSG Demo. So I'm just going to select that, and as you can see now, I've actually switched over to a different type of login page. This login page is actually provided by the Active Directory Federation Services environment. And depending on the SAML environment you use, the login page might be different, and there are several different providers out there, several that we list in our help, like Okta and Netminder, but there are also others out there as well that we may not provide instructions for, but you can, if you can figure out if you can determine the metadata for it, you can probably configure it to work, but I'll show you that in a bit. So I'm just going to log in here using my enterprise account. And as you can see, I've logged in. I'm going to click on Organization here so that you can actually see the profile of this account. Let's take a look at our profile. And what you'll see here is this account actually was, the information for this account was actually pulled from the Active Directory Federation Services environment, and it was given a username that identifies my domain. So right now, this is all set up, but what I really want to do right now is create a single sign-on experience between my ArcGIS Online environment with my on-prem portal-based Portal for ArcGIS environment. So I'm going to log out here. And I'm going to connect to my ArcGIS Enterprise environment. So I've just switched over to my ArcGIS Enterprise environment. I'm going to sign in as an administrative user, and I'm going to start the process of configuring this trust relationship between ArcGIS Enterprise and my SAML-based provider. In this case, it is Active Directory Federation Services, ADFS. So to do this, I'm going to select Organization, and I'm going to click on Edit Settings. And I'm going to scroll down to my Security tab. And here's where I can actually configure my identity provider. So I'm just going to select Set Identity Provider. Now the first thing I need to do is give my identity provider name. This could be any name, but it typically makes sense to give it a name that's going to be tied to your organization or is recognizable by your organization. The next thing I need to determine is how are users going to be added to Portal when they log in, or are they going to be invited to the Portal environment? So I have a choice. I can actually have, when anybody logs in, they are automatically added to the system and a brand new account is created. Alternatively, I can go through the whole invitation process and actually invite individual users who will have to respond, very similar to how you might invite a user to an ArcGIS Online environment. I'm going to actually have my users added automatically. Now, the next piece is key, because we're going to build a trust relationship between Portal for ArcGIS and my SAML-based provider, my Active Directory Federation services. So there needs to be some metadata that not only I provide to ADFS, but that ADFS provides to me so that I can actually know how do I map users once they log in? What certificate information is there? What certificate information do I need to know to encrypt and decrypt messages that go back and forth? So to do this, I actually need to get some metadata from the ADFS environment. Now, some SAML-based environments might allow you to download a file and upload that metadata. Other environments might require that you fill out some of this information. For example, the URL that is used to log in, so the URL I'm redirecting to when I log in. If I actually need to log out, what URL am I going to be redirected to when I log out? And of course, any certificates that I might need. But let's actually, in this case, ADFS is nice enough to give us a nice URL that we can use that contains all that metadata in it. So I'm just going to actually pull it from that URL, from that metadata. So I'm just going to paste that there. Before I click OK, let's take a look at some of the additional settings that we need to think about. So first, I want to make sure that any information that comes from ADFS is encrypted. Not only is the actual body of the response coming back encrypted, but then there's also within that going to be, it's a claim in the ADFS environment, but it's basically a token. I want to make sure that there's an additional encryption on that token when it comes back. So not only am I communicating with ADFS through HTTPS, which will use certificates, I also want some of the content within that actual message to be encrypted as well. I also want to make sure that anything I send to the ADFS environment is encrypted. So I'm going to actually also sign any of the stuff I send back. Now, in order to support SLO, which is single logout, in fact, I have to enable a signed request, and it has to be used a SHA-256 certificate. And then I'm going to select that I actually also want to be able, when I log out of our ArcGIS Enterprise, it's actually going to log me out of my session in ADFS as well. And also we're going to take a look at SAML-based group membership, so I need to check that off. So I've actually set up everything. The rest of the information is going to be added by the metadata that was within that URL I selected earlier. So I'm going to select Set Identity Provider. And let's quickly take a look at what it looks like now. As you can see, based on the metadata that I pulled from the ADFS environment, that URL, it provided certificate information that I can use for encrypting some of the information I send back and forth. As well, it actually gave me the logout URL, or it populated the logout URL to support the single logout operation. So I'm just going to cancel out of this. The other thing I want to show you is that I can actually choose to still support both out-of-the-box ArcGIS accounts as well as I can actually force people to only use enterprise logins as well. So that option is here. Now, I'm going to leave it so that I support both, but definitely you can actually restrict access only to enterprise logins. I'm going to save this. I'm going to log out as my administrative user. And now you see I actually have the using your TSG demo account option on the login page. Now here's the catch. I'm going to click on this and I get an error. The reason why I get an error is I have yet to configure the trust relationship in ADFS. So I still have to actually go into ADFS and do some settings as well. So I'm not going to, this whole session isn't really about the ins and outs of ADFS, but I do want to walk you through the steps it would take to configure the final parts of that trust. So to do that, I need to create a brand new relying party trust. So I'm just going to select Add Relying Party Trust. And this is going to be a claims-based trust because what I want to send is a security token that I can use to manage the user profile information as well as authorization. So I'm going to select Start. Now here's the catch. I need to actually provide metadata from ArcGIS Enterprise. So I could use a URL, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to download a file. I'm going to actually download a metadata file straight from our ArcGIS Enterprise environment that I can now use to populate the ADFS environment. So I'm going to log back into ArcGIS Enterprise again as my administrative account. I'm going to select Edit Settings. I'm going to go back to the Security tab. And this Get Service Provider button will actually download an XML file that contains the same or the complement metadata information that ADFS needs to complete the trust relationship. So I'm going to select Get Service Provider, and this metadata file downloads. And I'm going to go back to ADFS. So this is the file that I'm going to browse to here to populate the rest of the information that is needed to complete the trust between my SAML-based provider and ArcGIS Enterprise. So I'm going to click Next. I'm going to give it a name. Now I should mention that I'm using Windows 2016 here. The experience is a little bit different in Windows 2012. I'm going to click Next. Now, the last step really for me in this, at this stage is I have to decide who within my organization can actually log in from this service provider or from Portal for ArcGIS using the ADFS environment. So I can permit all accounts or I can configure multi-factor options. What I'm going to do is actually specify a group that I created in Active Directory that contains the list of users that I want to allow access to this particular service provider through an enterprise login. I'm going to click Next. I pretty much finished. The metadata is going to populate the rest of this information. And I'm going to close this. So now, I'm not quite done yet, because the claim that's going to get created as I'm communicating back and forth between ArcGIS Enterprise and Portal for ADFS, I need to define, okay, what within this information is going to be the username? What within this information contains profile information? And to do that, I have to create a rule. And what this rule is going to do is going to define what Active Directory attributes map to the properties that ArcGIS Enterprise is looking for when it gets the claim and parses it and takes a look at the profile information within. So I'm going to create a brand new claim. I'm going to create a brand new rule. I'm just going to give it a simple name. And now I need to define, okay, what property within Active Directory is going to equal the username information that Portal for ArcGIS is looking for. So in this case, the user principal name, that would be like my username, J. Osborne, would equal the name ID that we are looking for within that claim so that we can identify who's logging in. I may also want to know some profile information. For example, what is the username? What is the actual name of the user and their last name? What information in the claim is going to have their email address? And finally, in order to support enterprise groups, I also need to identify what property within this claim is going to tell me which groups this particular user is, what group this particular user is in. And we'll see an example of how that works as we get to the end of this demo. So I have all my information set up. I forgot to select my attribute store, which will be Active Directory. And then I'm going to click Finish. And I'm click OK, and now this claim is created. Now I should be able to go back. I'm going to sign out here of my portal session. And I should be able to now click on using my enterprise login or TSG demo account, and it should take me to the ADFS login page. And it does. So now I can actually log in as an enterprise user. And because I configured this user to be added to the system automatically, if I click on organization, you will actually see a brand new user has been added to the system right there. And if I take a look at my profile, I'll actually see that the first name, last name, and email information is populated. And that came in from those claim settings that we just did. The other thing I want to show is that now I should be able to, now that I'm logged in, start another browser and launch my ArcGIS Online organization account. And if I select to log in as an enterprise login, it should actually automatically recognize that I'm logged in as John, and sure enough, it logs me in. So that's sort of how I would create that single sign-on experience. And you could actually do this with other things like Salesforce and what other cloud-based or even internal-based providers, services that you may want to create a single sign-on experience for. So I'm going to just log out of this. Because what we're going to get to next, and I'm just going to sign out of this as well, the next step we're actually going to do is I want to create an enterprise group. And so what I actually want to do is create a group that basically users who are enterprise logins who are a part of this group will automatically be added to this portal-based group. And so membership to this portal-based group will be completely tied to this Active Directory group. So in order to do that, though, I have to be, the user creating this group has to be an administrator in the system. So I have to actually log in again as my admin user. And I'm going to up the privileges on my enterprise login user to administrator. I'm going to log out again and log in as my John Osborne account. And I'm going to create a brand new group, and then I'll show you how access to that group will be controlled by an underlying Active Directory group. So I'm just logging in now. So now my user is an administrator, so I can create a group. So what I want to do is I actually have a couple other, I have some other people within my organization who I want to actually share content with within Portal for ArcGIS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a group that only allows access to users who are a part of an existing Active Directory group. So I'm going to select groups, and like before, I'm going to create a brand new group, though there are some small differences that I'm going to get to. So we got to give it a name. Now, again, this time, the only people who I want to actually be able to see this group are people in my organization. Now, I have a new option now that I didn't have before, which was who can join this group, members of an enterprise group. So I'm going to actually select this. And what I need to do, and sorry, I'm terrible at typing, so I'm just going to cut and paste this. I'm going to specify an Active Directory group that contains users who are going to have access to content within this particular group. And it's actually going to, so what's going to happen is every time the user logs in, it's going to look at the claim and look at that group information that is encoded within that claim. And if they actually have TSG demo / portal users within that list, then they will actually have access to the content within this group. I'm going to leave the defaults, and I'm going to click Create Group. And if I actually look at membership here, it actually lets me know which Active Directory group will allow membership to this particular group. Before I actually do that, I want to just quickly create some content so that you can actually, that I can share, so that when I log in as, in this case, I'm going to log in as Abram's account, you'll actually see that he can, even though he's never logged onto the system before, he'll be logged on automatically, a new user created, and he will automatically see this content, or he'll actually have access to this content. So I'm just going to create a sample map and save it. Here's another way to share stuff. You can share right out of the map viewer. So I'm just going to select Share here, and I'm going to share with my Portal Users group. I'm going to save. So now what I'm going to do is actually log out, and I'm going to sign in as a different account, as Abram's account. what you'll see, again, a brand new account is created for Abram. Right here, that wasn't there before. His profile information, again, will show that information was pulled from Active Directory for profile information, email information. And if I actually select groups, you can actually see he's already a part of this portal users group because he's actually in an Active Directory group on my Active Directory server. He's actually in the TSG demo portal users group. And if I select this group, he can now see the content I just created. And I didn't really have to do anything else other than create that group. And he's already within the underlying Active Directory group. And just to show you that not all users can have access to this stuff, I do have some enterprise logins who I really don't want to share this stuff with. You know, Mike Rogotsky's a great guy, but still, you know, I'm not quite sure I trust him with this stuff just yet. So just to show you that even though Mike is a part of my portal enterprise login environment, he doesn't, because he's not within that underlying Active Directory group, he's not going to be able to see our portal users. He's not going to be able to see the content of the stuff within that portal users group. You know, it's easy for me to poke fun at Mike when he's not here, but he'll probably do a couple of sessions later on to return the favor, I'm sure. Anyways, that's it for that demo. So we're just going to finish up here. So in this webinar, you've learned about the identity-based security model, setting up roles and privileges, managing user access to content through groups, ArcGIS Enterprise Server Federation, and configuring enterprise logins and single sign-on. Just some resources and upcoming events. We've got Esri Canada user conferences going on all through the spring, so you can just check to see if there's any in your area. We'll also have more in the fall, so just keep note of the events page. There's also some training courses related to the content we talked about here, especially the ArcGIS Server Site Config and Administration course, as well as the ArcGIS Enterprise Configuration-Based Deployment course. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day and participating in today's webinar. We will email you a recording of the webinar shortly, as well as a PDF of the slides. Additionally, we'll post the webinar recording to our archive page when it's ready. We'd also like to get your thoughts on the presentation, so please fill out the survey that comes up when you exit the webinar. We will now stop the recording and take questions at this time.